that don't usually follow the basketball team, and I wouldn't have pushed here to, I wouldn't have pushed here to make an exception.
Are we up and running? Yep, we are live.
All right. We'll call to order the March 8th, 2023 Planning Commission for the City of Crest Point Park. We will begin with the roll call. Warren, would you help with that, please?
Yes, Commissioner Taylor.
Present.
Evans.
Present.
Saros.
Present.
Stahecki.
Present.
Coletta.
Present.
And Viteki.
Present.
Our seventh member, Mayor Hodges, is unable to attend today. So she coordinated her absence ahead of time with Patrick and I. So a motion to excuse her would be appropriate at this time.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Hearing none. Okay, so we'll move on to item 3 of the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes from our January 26, 2023 meeting. Those were included in our meeting packet. I trust everyone's had a chance to review those. Is there a motion to approve them?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Wonderful. And now we will move on to item number 4, which is public comment on agenda items. Is there any member of the public who wishes to make comment on our agenda item this evening?
About this,
Correct.
yeah, I've got something to say.
All right. Please stand up and introduce yourself and help us.
You said my name and what?
What city you live in?
Are you a park resident?
Yeah, I live in the park on 1100 block, 1106 Lake Point. My name's Dana Coyne. And actually, I have some photographs here. Can I just give each one of you pictures?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, you want, I got you. So, my neighbor came to me and said, I need you to sign this form so I can put the heating air conditioning unit between our houses. And our houses, not the, the property line, but our houses are from my knuckles. So we're close. So Randazzo came in November of 21 and they installed this thing, the first picture. The legs were on my property of a stand. So finally, Randazzo came when I called them in January, they came and put it on blocks. So the thing blows cold air on me in the winter and hot air on me in the summer, and it's obtrusive. And I signed off with a completely inaccurate description of how large this thing is and the fact that it blows cold air on me and hot air on me. I believe that it lowers my property value and it makes a narrow space for firefighters to come through. And I think this practice should be stopped in Grosse Pointe Park, especially where our houses are so close together. I don't think that any of you, if you happen to live in the Cabbage Patch, you live with a house that's really close to the next house, it's obnoxious. You can't put any landscaping around it. You can't put a fence around it. You can't put anything around it. And it's a practice that I think is extremely inappropriate. And I wrote my neighbor a letter and at the end, I've sent many communications, as you can see by the note there. And I said, look, if you just tell me how much it cost, I might be willing to say that I'd pay part of it to get the thing put in your backyard. But as usual, no comment, no talk, no nothing from him. So I put up with this for over a year and 3 months. And I don't think any of you would appreciate that. And I was willing to take part responsibility to get it put in his backyard since there's been no communication. I'm here now with this communication to you. And I guess I'll have to go to the next step if nothing actually happens on this. And I thank you for listening.
Thank you. Sorry for your frustration. Thank you for your comment. Any other public comment on agenda items tonight? Okay, hearing none. That would move us on to item 5 of our agenda this evening, which deals with our zoning ordinance rewrite. And to kick things off, we've got a presentation from a representative from McKenna regarding sign regulations and residential design standards. And that is Ms. Nani Wolf. And without further ado, why don't you come up and
Sounds great.
I do real quick, I do also want to introduce another illustrious guest here this evening. We have Mr. Terry Brennan. He is our city building official. He has a long history of zoning ordinance enforcement, interpretation, administration in several of the Grosse Pointe communities. And when it comes to the guy who acts, whatever law we write, he's the one who's going to be enforcing it essentially. So especially on these topics of signs and residential design standards, I thought it would be good to have him here to call upon as we see fit. So again, just wanted to introduce him to you. He hasn't been to a meeting with the Planning Commission in a while, so it's good to have you here tonight, Terry. All right, Connie, take it away.
All right. I don't know how to stand to prevent myself from blocking this in one direction. So if you can't see it, please feel free to move your chairs to a place where it's better for you. But yeah, we're going to start off today talking about infill design, partially because it is the more fun of the two. And then hopefully you all had a chance to walk around this past weekend and look at the signs in the different business districts. So we're coming in with a lot of information and a lot of opinions. So let's start off with residential infill. Flip to whatever page of your packets you need to, and let's get going. Okay, there we go. So quick agenda, so everyone can too. We're going to go into the local background of residential infill housing. Then we're going to talk about some sample ordinances that other Michigan communities have used to control and design residential homes. And then we're going to have an open discussion with the commission where they'll address some of those 3 questions. All right, so you all live here, you've all seen it. There is incremental development happening throughout the city, not always new builds, but sometimes a new garage. Someone wants to redo their front facade. Little incremental changes that are changing the character of the residential design throughout the city. These are just a few grabs. Here you can see the top right is a completely new home that was built trying to match a little bit of an older style. In the lower left, this is also a new home that was built in a more traditional style. And in the lower right, this is actually a facade redo on an existing home. It's kind of hard to see on this PowerPoint because it's a little small, but this home right here has 3 different textures and facade material types, as well as 2 different roofs. So those are some indicators you can say, hey, someone might have just redone their facade. You know, the rest of that house doesn't have a masonry front, but you know, this one wall does. So important things to note are that right now, our zoning ordinance is old. It does not regulate residential design other than saying be 15 feet back from the street and put up a fence if you want to have dogs in your backyard, that kind of stuff. But the truth is, Grosse Pointe has a really unique character, and the park specifically has a lot of historic homes, a lot of brick homes, a lot of things where we're trying to maintain the feel of the park as opposed to its neighboring areas. So, to think about infill ordinances, I pulled 2 examples for you. One is Huntington Woods, which hopefully some of you have driven through and seen Huntington Woods before, and 2 is Holland. And Holland specifically will ignore the fact that it's a lakefront city. We'll be talking about their inland properties specifically. But these are 2 communities that are similar in, I would say, age and also character to Grosse Pointe, and also have a lot of historical value in their homes that is similar to this area. All right, the first one is Huntington Woods. So Huntington Woods is very small. I think they're less than a square mile. They're half a square mile total. And they have a really, really mature housing stock that kind of reflects those in Grosse Pointe Park. And they have 2 different types of infill regulations. One is historic and one is non-historic. So we're going to focus on the non-historic regulations today, but I also wanted to mention that they do separate the 2, given that there's a whole broader umbrella of historic housing preservation that goes on in the United States. So first, briefly on the historic ones. Historic infill is regulated by the state government, federal government, and sometimes by the local government if they choose to adopt additional standards. In Huntington Woods, they have a guideline document, which is a totally separate PDF, not a part of the zoning ordinance, that regulates their housing. It gives the Historic Commission a lot of leeway for what the housing design looks like, and it's only referenced in the zoning ordinance. So it gives it some legal power, but it's very discretionary. They also have regular infill control. This one is completely codified in the zoning ordinance, no separate documents. It's enforced by the Planning Commission, and anytime they want to update it, they update it just like the rest of the zoning ordinance. So this one is much less discretionary, and it kind of matches the legal framework that separates historic from non-historic properties. So these Huntington Woods regulated non-historic infill in 2018, and these are some of their pre-regulation infill homes. Huntington Woods has a very similar appearance to what you would say is like the middle to southeast side of Grosse Pointe Park. Lots of, Tudor style homes, that sort of stuff. And they were seeing things like this popping up throughout the city as tear downs, and they said, whoa, we don't like that. Especially it's not always the multi-million-dollar homes. This home right here has a fire retardant shingle siding that looks like this, if you know what I mean. And it has 3 different facade types. The windows are all different shapes and sizes. So they just said, hey, we need to regulate this in general, not just for these multi-million-dollar homes. After regulation, you can see there's a very distinct change in how these homes are being constructed. This one is only 2 facade types. It has a complete wraparound of the material. It's not just a patchwork where one face is brick, one face is vinyl, one face is masonry for some reason. And this one, we can debate black windows and black gutters till the cows come home, but it is a more cohesive design than the ones that were being built beforehand. So once this started happening after 2018, these are just some samples. I believe I gave you all their ordinance, correct?
Yes.
These are some sample pieces from their ordinance. They are very, very specific on what your house needs to look like if you're doing infill. So for example, let's look at one of these. Exterior finish, 50% of your exterior finish has to match with the neighborhood. So if you live in a neighborhood, a block, where all the houses are completely brick, you have a minimum 50% brick that your house has to be composed of. All right, on to Holland. So Holland is very different from Huntington Woods in that instead of doing really discrete regulations saying, okay, your roof overhang is no more than 12 inches and setting those extreme finite number of boundaries, they just said it needs to match the neighborhood. So most of Holland's ordinance says your neighborhood is the 300-foot area around you. The reason they chose that is because in Holland, a block could be a half a mile long. So block didn't really make sense for them. They said 300 feet. And they also limited their designs to 2 zoning districts. And that's because a lot of Holland is very suburban, they're not necessarily historic areas. They don't necessarily care about the design of those new suburbs cropping up around the edges. So they said, hey, we're going to limit this to just 2 districts. And it also applies to, I think, interestingly, reconstructions of existing homes as well. So in Huntington Woods, their regulations really apply to garages and complete new builds. It's rather silent on reconstructions, but if your house burns down, you also do want some sort of guidance on what you can do with that. So this is a pre-regulation infill. Holland adopted their ordinance in 2021. So it's not quite as clear, we don't have the before and after pictures like we do in Huntington Woods, but up in the right-hand corner, you can see a pre-regulation infill home. It is, it's kind of flat. It's also entirely made of vinyl rather than brick or wood or any other more durable material. And it has the garage fronting right in the neighborhood street. Down on the right, you'll see these are more typical homes in Holland. They have a lot of detail. They're typically 2 stories. They incorporate architectural elements that add a lot more interest. So the other thing I wanted to highlight in Holland is Huntington Woods does not talk about alleys because they don't have alleys. But in Holland, they have a requirement that if you're served by an alley, you have to access through the alley. I think that's something to consider when we're talking about Grosse Pointe Park as well. All right, now we're going to get into the discussion portion. So this is a discussion time for you to just talk with each other and talk with me as we go through each picture. But let's get started. All right, these are 2 sample homes in Grosse Pointe Park that were built using roughly the same design footprint. And they're right next to each other, as you can see, built around the same time, but they have sort of different character when you look at them. So this is the point of the presentation where I just want to hear your feedback and your opinions about what types of design regulations we're looking for. So what's done well and what isn't done well with these 2. It's not a quiz. It's not like I've decided. Yeah.
Bush there, I'm kind of having trouble even finding the difference here. It's like one of those, like, what's different on the photo, you know?
It's a little challenging to know how it fits within the context of the block too, like
Right.
what are the pre-existing houses that were around it. So
This is in the denser part of Grosse Pointe Park on the northwest side.
Is this on, Lake Point?
It might be, I can't
So
remember.
this is right off of Charlotte Boyd. Is that either Lake Point or Maryland right off of
I
Charlotte?
think it's Maryland, honestly.
Okay, yeah.
But that's the neighborhood we're thinking about. But I really want to talk about the design of the houses themselves.
What I can see, right, it looks like you're limited to, you don't have the hodgepodge of like external facade material, right? If I'm seeing correctly on the left-hand side, right, you've got, looks like maybe vinyl siding plus a, masonry on that like A-frame section. Again,
the house on the right, hard to see beyond the bush, but
Maybe bush
if we'll assume
regulation.
that everything is the same beyond that, right, it does look like you got some consistency within your facade and obviously the roof.
Okay, so you're saying that's one of the things that's done well, is
Right,
that there's no
yeah.
more than 2 materials, okay?
Correct, yeah.
Are there any municipalities that require, for at least a new build, having more than one material for a facade?
Not necessarily, but that is something, if necessary, that can be required. Most say no more than 3 or no more than 2, but don't specify if you need to have 2. Although some do say that you have to have, say, accent flashing around the roof or accent border around the front door, something like that, but they don't specify which material it has to be. And do it at different times. You can also point out things that you think are not done well on this home.
Yeah, I know, familiar with both these properties. I think they fit in pretty well the neighborhood. Like, they don't really, stick out to me versus a lot of the other 1920, 3 builds that are in the neighborhood there. I mean, it's a colonial style, so I don't see how this could, there could be much of an objection to this style of build personally.
You've got consistency too, in terms of, I would assume, both these, assuming they're serviced by an alley, you don't have inconsistency, right, with one of them being serviced by a driveway.
All alley service. Any opinions on shutters?
I was gonna say aesthetically, the shutters I think is a better look.
Yeah.
I noticed that right away, is that the absence of the shutters, I think, is not as finished.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to say like, oh, a home has to have shutters, but agreed, I think the shutters is a better look.
Yeah, some communities require that windows have either a sill or a recess of 2 inches. So commonly, after like suburban manufacturing became popular, everyone's doing those flat windows that are exactly the same plane as the wall. So some communities are saying, hey, we're not gonna make you have shutters, but maybe we'll have you inside your windows, so there's some dimension to the home. So is that something we might be interested in? Even if
That's probably the majority of our housing stock. The windows are inset,
Mhm.
right? So for most of our pre-war homes, correct? Like, I'd say the majority of those, the windows are inset on those.
Yeah, definitely.
I agree. I'd say that probably does help. Again, right, without the context of the houses nearby, but you can see a little bit of that, a little bit of the windows on the house immediately to the left,
With the
right?
framing, yeah.
Correct.
Mhm.
And I do think that is, that window detail, right, aside from the facade, is probably the second most obvious, giveaway, right, that it's a recent build as opposed to, if you're to point to, right, one design feature.
Mhm. Yeah, this is all great. This is what I want to capture. Because I'll be helping write it, so. All right.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
I noticed that both of them have covered front porches. on there.
That's very
On the
common for
front.
that area, yeah.
And which is very common to the area. So obviously some areas, they don't have, front covered porches like that. But I don't know if that's, yeah, I'm just saying that's something I noticed too, that not every house has them, but the ones that do, they're all, and concentrated together. They all have that one design feature typically.
Yeah, maybe for that one, we could also look back to Holland's ordinance. They have a lot of regulations about porches and whether or not they can be enclosed or open, especially with the front porch. Because, they have a lot of tourist homes that you do want to close up in the winter, but that's not really the case here. So, yeah. Are we ready to go to the next sample? Okay.
Terry's got it.
Oh, yeah,
Oh, yes.
go for it.
If you look to I'm assuming the house all the way to the left of Blue House, if you like trim,
Mhm.
you can see that the difference in their windows where they've got casing and headers, where the windows on the newer homes are a little plain because there's not any detail or trim around them. That might be something to consider. The other thing, though, the house on the right has a hip style roof. So I don't know what's to the right of that house, but it's gonna give a less imposing profile to the property adjacent. Where the house on the left here, with that high peak, might give the impression or feeling of less light, less natural ventilation, things of that nature. Just something to consider in height to the proximity to the property line. Just, architectural features to consider, and if you're a certain height, maybe increase your setback to accommodate that so that you're creating more light ventilation space.
So what you mean when you say hip style roof, just to clarify for everyone?
Yeah, that's a hip style,
Right
so
there.
with that
Yeah.
hip, it's not gonna be as imposing to the property next door. Now, again, the existing house, the house with the blue one, that's got a gable style and anyway itself, and it doesn't appear to be any taller than the new house, but this new house looks like it might feel bigger at the street or in appearance from the street just because of the style of the roof and then the reverse coming out front.
Yeah, I think that's great. And thanks for giving us the terms. Very helpful.
Also, a really great point you mentioned about the actual height of the buildings, right? There is some consistency there. I can recall traveling recently to a neighborhood in Indianapolis, visiting friends, and it was very obvious the infill properties, right? And it was an area where there's not a lot of basements, right? So a lot of the infill properties were obvious because they were drastically taller, right, than a lot of the, old housing stock that was present in the neighborhood. But this does at least maintain, that like a uniformity standpoint.
Our height regulations, I think, are pretty lax. Liberal, yeah, liberal is the right word for residential properties even. You know what it is, Terry?
And you can go to 35 feet to the midpoint. It's a pretty tall house.
Yeah, 3 stories.
And some are set, with 5 foot or 4 foot side yard setback even. It's pretty imposing. There's one being built right behind you. That's pretty tall. Again, the houses on that block are tall.
Right.
It's not out of character. That area, but
Yeah, that's a good point. If anybody wants to see infill happening right now, right on Lake Point, just like 3 houses north of the library, right here. I encourage a duplex. I encourage you to drive past.
But it's not out of character. for
No.
the block.
All right, let's go on to our second example. So this one, we're gonna start zoomed in on 2 homes and then we'll zoom out to show the context for the remaining block. So these are 2 more infill homes, kind of done in a matchy style. But I again want to just ask what's working and what isn't.
Yeah, I go to the windows again, and this one I would agree with Commissioner Saros that I wouldn't necessarily have to regulate or want to regulate shutters, but something about the home on the left with the detail around the window looks much better than the previous slide, which had no detail. So maybe some level of specificity around, I don't know, something about the inside of the window or some finish around the window. I think that makes a major difference. Exterior appearance.
Better than the shutter one?
I think the one on the left looks better than the shutters in this case, yes. Yeah.
Right, I think it does, right, create a standard quality to a degree, right? And it's then character that's consistent with the other homes. So I think it's, as opposed to something that looks maybe more with less detail, right? Looking more mass produced. I think it.
Yeah, there's not much dimension to it.
Right.
So I don't know if there's, what's the right way to be able to say that, there needs to be some kind of dimension to the front facade of the home.
That's why I like that porch element in the previous
Yeah,
one, it
right.
kind of brings up the.
Right, I like the element here, right, on the house on the left. It does have more of a front entry, portico, right, as opposed to a porch. However, having all of the porch be covered, right, I think is much better executed, not just for, how this picture appears right now, but if you think about this house, right, is house on the left and the right, is they're going to stand 10, 15, 20 years from now, right? I think it's something that helps maintain, right, the quality of the homes in the neighborhood. Some consistency right around covered porches in the front as opposed to uncovered.
I actually have a question for Terry, because you're here.
Sure.
The skirting that goes under these porches, right now, does the building department prefer to be able to access that skirting for inspections, or like, would the vegetation on the
There's
left?
not a requirement.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be preferable to be able to stay there, but, if it's open, it's inviting to vermin.
Okay.
So there's pros and cons.
Okay,
Access panel would be nice.
we're talking about the crosshatch there. Some access to that area would be necessary.
I think with the house on the left, the mix of, looks like a mix of different kinds of vinyl. Like one on the lower level and one on the top adds a little bit more interest and dimension than just the exclusive use of vinyl siding with the house on the right. But it seems like from the picture that there are 3 different materials, you have brick, or maybe like brick and then 2 different kinds of,
In the doorway?
yeah,
Yeah, that is brick.
yeah.
And it's also worth considering, is 3 materials acceptable if they're all painted 2 colors? That's
Right,
something
well,
to
this,
consider as well.
I know there's,
And
there's
Yeah.
gray, there's brick plus the 2 different grays and white. I mean, well, so maybe that what adds a little bit to the character, right? That the peak of the roof and the little bit of detail there, like some architectural interest. You just don't want it to be too busy. But too plain, too plain is obviously too plain too.
Appreciate the columns, right? Like even within the porch itself, right? The columns and the railings, there's a railing on both left and right hand of the steps, right? But they're also consistent from they're painted the same shade, right? Which
Yes. And with the house on the right in this one, and then in the house on the left on the previous slide, both of those had unpainted natural wood looking porches. Which kind of, I feel like it looks less polished.
Let's zoom out to the broader neighborhood context of these houses. So they're on the right now. These are their 2 neighboring homes. Thinking about the context of the neighborhood they're in, with the porches, with the number of materials, all that stuff, what are your thoughts?
I don't know if it's just the angle of the photograph, but it looks like the facades are not aligned exactly. Like the houses to the left are forward,
Mm-hmm.
but also,
The setbacks on,
yeah. So they're not, I mean, I understand if they're not exactly on the line, but it looks to me, and again, it might be the angle. It looks to me like the newer infill houses are quite a bit back from the sidewalk relative to the other houses.
But we do have an infill house, like Street of Johnson, the patch that's not even, it doesn't even front the street, it fronts the alley. So you have to, it's like, oh, is there a house there? You look and it's way back there too. That's not regulated right now. It's,
There are some
There are some, yeah.
regulations, we're trying to, eliminate situations where it would look like it's a missing tooth on a block or, stick out too far. These two houses might have been designed with the idea of a larger porch being put on them, that, because the houses next door do have porches. But it's an opportunity here or a good example of requiring at least to match the material, in natural materials or, which is tough to do in and of itself because if you want to go back to the last picture, sorry to take you back on this. The porches is a good, there should be more natural material or more materials to match what's consistent on that block. For example, brick or even wood siding. But then you see natural materials, the house on the right has got a natural wood porch, which looks like it's in accelerated state of disrepair. And the porch on the other side, the railing that I would assume that that's either plastic or metal, which is not a natural material. But it looks like it's being maintained or easier to maintain for a longer period of time. And the vinyl siding on the house on the right is obviously already failing. Not that there's anything wrong with vinyl siding, but it's not a natural material. It doesn't have the, can't let it stand up to sunlight. Things of that nature. It's really been a good opportunity to add some natural material, at least on the first floor of these buildings.
And it's also something important to point out is that aluminum siding, which looks just like vinyl siding, also has the risk of it can be dented and it's very hard to undent. So
And it fades, too, it fades.
Yeah, so obviously wood siding is what we love and what houses are historically made of, but it also is getting more expensive. So just something to think about as we're going forward.
I know on the setbacks, like, a front yard setback is a minimum. So if it's 15 feet, if somebody wants to put their house further back, they can, that might look out of place. And I know some of our setbacks are determined on like the average of the block or the house next door. And again, over time, those averages are always like sad. They creep up, if somebody puts a little bit more, that shifts the address just enough, so that's something that we might want to be a little mindful of, as we're drafting this, that, experiencing setback creep to some extent.
It also looks to me like the two houses, when you zoomed out, the two existing houses are further apart from each other than the two newer ones. So I don't know if the lots are the same size, that would be an indicator that the newer houses are taking up a bigger percentage of the lot. And I know we have restrictions in the current zoning ordinance of that, but I think they're kind of loosey-goosey. And you can get cases where the house is a huge portion of the lot. If they cobble together two lots together, they can kind of work with the existing zoning. You might get houses which are like, monstrous relative to the footprint of the lot.
Obviously, in our different zoning districts, our lot sizes vary dramatically from, what's our smallest? Do we have a 30?
30 feet.
Okay, yeah, we have, our biggest is probably 200 or 150. So a completely different style of home can go on that property. So one size definitely doesn't fit all, which is why I really liked how Holland chose that we're only going to really apply these standards in these specific areas versus, the entire city is subject to these, all these different standards.
Yeah, you certainly can't have like a general standard portion and then say, okay, this specific neighborhood also has these regulations and this specific neighborhood has these regulations.
Well, we're gonna need to have that.
Especially with fences, especially when you get to the lakefront, right? Fences are in people's rear yards technically, so that's all going to need to be separated by area.
Is that something that, I guess, in your opinion, is that common to specify that based on like the residential district, whether it's like an R1 or is that generally more case by case than that, like the boundaries of which you would apply certain regulations?
Absolutely. So most communities do it by district, but also most communities are larger and broader than Grosse Pointe Park. So if we were to specify something like that, I would actually use the street boundaries and describe the limits, just because, we we don't want to have to create a new zoning district just because one place has a different fence regulation than another, right? It's just easier to do it that way. But yeah, something else to mention about, wait, what was I just talking about? Oh yeah, depth to width ratios. So Huntington Woods has regulations to say basically you can't make like a really deep house that's super narrow. So that might be also something to consider just to, when thinking about lot coverages and those sorts of things. We ready to move on to the next one?
This is interesting you mentioned, right, how like the houses appear closer, farther apart to each other. I do think the orientation, right, of the roof also kind of plays into that.
Yeah.
Right, the new builds appear much more imposing from the sidewalk view, right, just because that vertical face of, the house is you're taking it head on as opposed to, the gabled roof that's oriented, I guess, parallel right to the street.
You mean this, like, the way it slopes down here in front?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Disney World, when they, they make all the buildings look way bigger than they are because they just play with the heights and the angles.
So now that we're talking about roof, this is a great additional example. So here we have an older home next to a relatively newer build, with, again, similarly, it has some downward sloping roofs, more than the ones we just looked at, but also has some of these flat roofs. And this is the older existing home. So go at it. Let me know your thoughts. And this one is in the southeast portion of town. I can't remember what street specifically.
Berkshire.
Oh, did you live near that one?
I just know.
Oh, okay.
These are real.
Oh, there you go. Good to have you on the team. And we can also comment on the older home left as well for the comparison.
But it's just.
Everybody lives in this home, but you have to.
Yeah, right. Yeah, before, yeah. I mean, I think most of these homes, the home on the right were built in the 90s. And I think they do a great job of kind of encompassing a lot of the character of Grosse Pointe. I mean, they're clearly a more updated build, but they have a lot of Tudor, elements to them, and a lot of dimension. I mean, even this product is something like this is not really built too often nowadays, just mostly because of where construction costs are. So I think this is a really good example and the ideal scenario for like what a newer build ends up looking like on a neighborhood with more older housing stock.
I agree. I think this is a pretty strong example. I think of it from the standpoint of if you were driving down this road at, say, 20 miles an hour and you were focused on would you pick up, while still managing to keep the car on the road, right? That house is, does it fit in the character of the neighborhood? And I don't think it would cause you to, pick your head, rubberneck at all. Whereas maybe some of those homes we looked at on the previous slide, right, might stick out a little bit more. And they certainly do to me. You mentioned, right, like the detail, the casements around the windows, right, like with that, that slightly arch, right, the brickwork is, I think, consistent with, looks the part, right, amongst the older homes that are in that area.
That house looks like in a subdivision across from me in Chesterfield that was built in the 80s, 90s. It looks like all those other houses, but this one looks more Grosse Pointe and it's exactly for everything we're saying with the elements and the different materials.
Any thoughts on the faux pane windows, the ones that have all the crossbars that aren't actually individual panes?
Maybe like the button bar in the window.
Yeah, but they're not truly individual panes of glass, you know what I mean?
Right,
They're a design feature.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. I think it's probably the most reasonable, right? Reasonable way cost wise, right, to like approximate kind of a leaded glass look without, right.
Although I do have a question about those. If the pane bars were white, would your opinion change on that?
Probably so.
Okay, well, this one was easy. Move on to the next one. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about not new builds, but additions, facade redos, that sort of stuff. So this one is an older home with a new garage addition. And similarly, this one is an older home that has it's like a kitchen extension almost, as well as a garage. And for this one right here, I do want to mention this white wraps around on the other side of the house symmetrically. So that was already present before they built this addition. This one is a corner lot, so you can see the house from both that side and this side. Technically, its front faces that way. This one is also a corner lot, so the front of the home, sorry, this one's not a corner lot, so this is the front of the house facing out to the street. And they have two entranceways on this one. This is their garage door and the front door. This one, garage door, front door is around that side. Just for context. All right.
I think garages seem to be a big hot point for new builds. You know, I hear a lot of comments of, well, I feel like I'm staring at a garage on some new builds. So I think that's something that might have to be addressed one way or another for whatever we decide. I'm kind of impartial on it. I know there's sometimes at the lot size, it's just where do you put the garage? But I think that's something that this 1262 Grayton is the one on the left, is which, especially with additions too, is I think additions are actually probably, that's more commonplace for our community than a brand new build. So making sure that the additions, that this all encompasses additions, I think is important that we look at that closely.
And I particularly want to hear what you think about garages in the non-alley areas of the city. Because of course, if you have an alley, very easy to put a garage on the rear part of your home, but specifically, these types of neighborhoods.
I can think of two recent new build infills where the setback of the garage makes a huge difference. So there's two on Audubon, one on the 1200 block and one on the 1000 block. And the one on the 1200 block, the garage door is much closer to the street, so not much of a setback. And it's just kind of, it seems a little out of place compared to the house that's on the 1000 block that is just a little bit set back further. So I think for, I guess the setback of the garage, if it's going to be street facing, I think it makes a difference.
So like how this one is set back 3 feet and has the little roof, the full roof bit.
Yeah.
I'd say even more of a setback.
More of a
I mean,
setback.
would be ideal, but I just don't even know, do we want to go that direction of sticking our nose in and requiring? I think most people
said yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think most people would agree that the setback of the garage is more ideal, but like for this home on Grayton here, like maybe that just wasn't wasn't an option. And because I know here the Milk River runs in the backyard of that property, so maybe the soils and the foundation that you just couldn't even do it. So I don't.
It's also important to keep in mind that that is something where you could set a setback requirement, and then if someone has an exceptional condition, like having a wetland in their backyard, they would obtain a variance for that.
Yeah.
Because that would meet the requirement for an unusual, extreme hardship that would grant a variance. So just keep that in mind.
Good one.
And this one, technically, the lower right, their garage is entirely in their rear yard because they're a corner lot. So
Well, is it the rear yard? It depends with corner
it's the
lots,
side yard.
which is something we have to address too in ours.
Yeah, what about the design of the one on the lower right? Thoughts? Aside from the fence, ignoring that.
I think it looks extremely natural and, I don't think if you told me, right, that was an addition, I would be able to, yeah.
I mean, it's pretty
unconventional,
unconventional, but like it's, have your front door, because that ends up being the front door there. That's really set back from the corner lots. Obviously, I feel like it's like a whole different ballgame. I think it is a beautiful house. I think the materials are all good. I think especially for the orientational lot, I think everything works.
And they have different kinds of materials on that house, so
It's an interesting point because obviously, right, a garage has a huge impact, especially, you mentioned if the garage is facing the street, it's going to dominate the facade, right? There's no way around it. There's ways to mitigate it somewhat. I do kind of appreciate how the house on the left right, did at least manage to lower the grade slightly on the addition, and instead of having it perfectly, right, like perfectly parallel to, you know, the house itself, or like the previous house. What's kind of interesting, right, is like garages are obviously gonna be a hot button topic because we do a lot of things from a community standpoint that are focused on, hey, there's not enough parking, right? And we want to create space, right, for not just businesses, but for residents. So obviously a part of that, right, is, you know, garages, and that's not just for houses that have back alley access, right? That's also for a lot of homes that have a wider lot that can accommodate a driveway. And then you look at the fact that also, right, a lot of these are older homes. The cars are not getting smaller, you know, so a 2.5 car garage is essentially what you need to fit 2 cars, right? So it's understandable that this is probably going to be a pretty key part of, you know, how we implement design standards, because lots of people, when they make modifications to their house, are probably going to be addressing a garage.
Not to mention rooms above garages too.
Right.
Would you mind going actually to the previous
photo or show house there? So something to note is that front right window, that is actually the garage.
So the garage is actually in the front of this house, and you pull around to the side and the garage door is on the side. So the garage to this house is actually completely in the front.
On the right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So although the garage is right here in the front, the lot's wide enough where the driveway is in the side and you can pull on the side in the garage. I think that's a great practice, because your challenge is your options are you either do, like on a house like this, you either do this or you put the garage in the back. The problem is if you put it in the back, often your kitchen is in the back. And then most people want to be able to be in their kitchen and look in their backyard, kids playing and whatnot. Your garage is there that can obstruct the view of your backyard. So garage, we're gonna have a lot to talk about with garages. And I think it's just our lot sizes are so diverse, our streets are so diverse. Like I think it's gonna be really challenging to come up with something that is gonna fit for everywhere.
There's a question.
Sir, yeah, your hand is probably asleep by now.
Yeah. Go to the next slide where you talk about the house that was on the upper left-hand corner. I grew up in 171 Lewiston, and that's the way the house was designed originally. And a lot of the houses on Lewiston and on Merriweather, you know, it's a larger yard. You've got plenty of space to go back, but it was designed to have a 2-car garage on the front that's offset to the back. So this style is actually very traditional to Grosse Pointe. You know, so it's keeping in mind as well that, you know, and like the house here, we had a bedroom that was set up above those 2-car garages. That house was probably built in about 1940, I would imagine. So it's, you know, keeping in style, or it is in keeping in the style of Grosse Pointe.
That's a good point. I think it's easy to get, you know, you think of like traditional, right, to an area, it's more obvious, right? It conjures up the image of like a Tudor. Well, I guess it's not the only thing that's traditional.
I like that one.
Oh, back to the
way
first
back,
slide?
yeah, going to local background. But there's a home that's on here that's from Harvard.
That one right there, the bottom left.
So this is on Harvard, right? And so this is like your bread and butter new construction. This is the most economical thing to build nowadays, like this style, and also is the easiest for lot sizes. Like, is this something that, do we feel this fits into Grosse Pointe Park? You know, so that's, I think, the question. I'd say the majority of the homes, there are a lot of homes that have the garage in the front, but the majority have a setback to it. And like my house is like that, but my setback's only 10 feet. You know, it's pretty, I don't think it needs to be that far back, but I'd say that's probably a little more
Would fit in
Something that just creates some depth.
Yeah, some
Rather than
depth.
This flat plane one.
Versus having, yeah, the garage door flush with the front facade. I think it'd be more ideal to have some kind of setback requirement, but also understanding that there are gonna be some scenarios that, you know, maybe it does make sense to have them in the front of the house. I think it's a good looking house, you know, but I also don't think that looks like our traditional Grosse Pointe. Oh. Sorry to keep making you jump
No,
around.
that's great. I mean, that's why we're here, is to talk about all this stuff. Anyone else have thoughts on this gray house before we move on?
Kind of looks like my house, but.
Or no offense. It's beautiful. I said it's beautiful.
It's okay, mine's yellow.
So one other thing I wanted to ask you guys about here is differing doors. So Huntington Woods, for example, says that you have to have the same style and material of door for all the entryways that are visible from the street for your home. Is that something that you would think we should regulate at that level?
I don't think we have enough doors, you know, homes that have multiple entryway doors in the front of the house. That might be one of the only ones.
Yeah, I think the more obviously jumps to mind, right, is the house where maybe you're looking at it on a 45. You see,
Yeah,
right, the side door that empties out right into the driveway and the front door.
Terry, what do you think about that? I mean, is that,
I think maybe not so much the door, but the treatment around the door could be handled a little differently. Just to make it feel a little more cohesive, like it belongs there. This one's probably the entrance to the garage or the breezeway or lobby or something like that, so it would be the same as a side entry coming off your driveway where and those are clearly different doors. Side entry doors are generally different. Your main entry door has a more inviting entrance because that's the entry. It's your main entry, and this was not meant to be the main entry. Which probably is utilized more than the other doors.
Then there's duplexes, and those doors are
oh yeah.
all over the
that's a
place
good-
sometimes.
That's a good point.
The new one there, Terry, there's one in the front, one in the rear, and then one on the side, right? It's actually not too, it looks like a single family home from
From the street.
You're saying in a duplex, door consistency would be more important than on a single family home? Or are you saying door differentiation? would be
it's just something to be mindful of, really,
I mean, I think for a duplex, I think consistency, that is important in that scenario. And I'm not saying it's not here either, but I'm just saying I can't think of too many properties that have two visible entrances from the front facade of the property.
It's also important to think that this would apply to new builds though. So going forward, if someone chooses to put two doors on the front facade of their home for some reason.
I guess that's just that kind of, to me, becomes the root of the is how often does that occur, right? Is it worth?
I think the bigger things are like the window treatments and the materials themselves.
Yeah, or requiring some form of door treatment so that it's not just flat, something around the edge of the door. Okay, got it. Finishing up my notes. Okay. So we are now past the picture portion and we are on to the key discussion portion. So I think we've already talked about how we envision putting garages into the fabric of the city by extension of that last slide. But I do want your thoughts on the first question, which is, in looking at the two sample ordinances that you have before you, are you envisioning leaning more towards Collins' model, where you basically say, hey, match your block in these ways, or leaning more towards Huntington Woods model, where you actually have discrete regulations, and that could be the whole city or specific districts?
I think, for me anyway, the way I look at it, it would kind of depend on the type of regulation. Like, there's certain parts where I could envision being very specific, like things having to do with the, I guess, the dimensions and the placement of the building. Because I wouldn't want to be having to go back and forth with the developer about things like height or how much of the lot you can use for the footprint of your house, Or, if it's an addition, how much, what share of the existing space you can take up with the addition? Those are kind of like big ticket-ish type things to me that we want to be really specific on that. So there's not a lot of going back and forth. And then a lot of the other things, I guess I'd put in the bucket of like look and feel type items, like the appearance of the doors, or, you know, if you need sashes in the window or how many windows on per floor, stuff like that. You know, I think maybe we could be a little more flexible in terms of what's written in the zoning for that, because I mean, some of the pictures I saw, I didn't really like the design, but it's not my house. And you know, I like Tudors. I live in a Tudor, but I also like the fact that not every house on my block is a Tudor. So I guess I want to have the zoning be a little more flexible in terms of the kind of the design elements, appearance type things.
Okay,
So that's just the way I look at it.
so you're saying for some elements, we would get specific, for example, saying you have to have a recessed window or some sort of design around the window. But then for the general design of the house, you'd say match the block, match the.
Yeah. Yeah, something in general like that, or like height. I mean, I think we should have a hard and fast item in the code about height, like you can't exceed the average by like 5-10% or something like that of the block. And you can't be more, or you can't be less than a certain distance from the neighbors. I think those are cases where we need like something that's very specific. You know, and they could plead for relief, you know, they can come here and ask for relief, but I think it should be written in the code in a very specific way for those items.
That's probably like the one thing that our code currently has, right? It's like basically all it has, it's just setbacks.
Basically,
Thing that our zoning code really currently has. I admit to having come in here believing more, you know, being more of like in the camp, very general statements, but I feel like looking through some of these things that we've kind of highlighted, and I agree that there should be a balance, but I think for some of those things, if we say just meet the, you know, the character of the neighborhood or consistent with the neighborhood, there are probably certain things that we then make very easy for people to not include, say like, you know, window encasements, right? That we've kind of agreed make a pretty substantial difference. And if you don't have them, right, they're very unlikely to appear in the house at any point in the future. And I also think, you know, so I am kind of in favor of maybe putting in more specifications, right, in our code. I don't think it needs to get detailed to the point of us, you know, being like, no sashes and like regular.
or scallop your windows or whatever, yeah.
Right, but I also think, right, we want to create a situation where, you know, the building department's actually able to, you know, enforce some consistency without also creating the opposite situation where, you know, everybody that comes to build or do any development in this area is coming before us saying, oh, I want to use a different, I want to use black windows, right? And black gutters. And I want to, you know, appeal to the planning commission. That's probably, it would get attendance up, right? But maybe.
Speaking of our building department, our building official did it.
So, we do have, height area, regulations that minimum height and maximum height, depending on the block. I think it's Holland that has the neighborhood where they use a radius instead of going from one cross street to the next cross street. That might be a better approach to add just some general terms like architectural harmony, consistency of materials, whether they be natural or, you know, I don't know that we have a block that's got all vinyl or anything like that, but whatever, just consistency of materials. And the one example had, you know, if 50% of the houses have this much brick, then you try to incorporate either brick or stone or some other natural consistent material. So that could be done with general terms where whoever's in charge of reviewing that plan can say, okay, I'm gonna look at this block and this many houses are wood clapboard siding, you know, or craftsman style like Barrington. this first block of Barrington has a lot of craftsman style homes. Let's try to match that architecture and material, so I think it's easy, I shouldn't say easy to do, but it's got a generally easy approach to it by adding simple terms. We don't have that right now. There's not an architectural harmony statement in our ordinance where you can avoid homes like the two vinyl siding, all vinyl siding versus here's a house that's right next to it 2 doors away, it's all brick, and even the one on the other side, look at one picture, that was an all brick house. And then there's two all vinyl siding homes. Well, those are clearly not architecturally harmonious with that block.
And I agree with that, Terry. But also something to consider here is that that's gonna pretty much rule out any modern style builds. And we have modern style builds throughout Grosse Pointe Park, and some of them are the most interesting and I'd say most beloved homes in the community, you know? Like Middlesex, for example. Like Middlesex has such a vast housing stock and some like really cool modern homes that are, were built in the 70s. And I think that's also one thing that makes the community very, very interesting and very cool. So, is there a way, like I can only build my modern home if it's like, a block away from that or within the radius of that other one, right? Like, is there a way we can?
Yeah, there had to be the first mid-century modern house, which is kind of not my bag as far as architecture, but kind of cool.
Right.
And they're spread throughout the community. Are they architecturally harmonious? Nope.
Right.
But they fit.
Right.
Maybe there's some way to add, classic terms in there so that it's, you're maintaining some architectural harmony. Might not be the style of the house, or the architectural style, but you're doing it in materials, or you're doing it in some other features, architectural features that can be incorporated that would bridge those gaps.
Right. And one thing that we haven't really talked about, it's more procedural, but let's say we create all these standards, whether they're broad or specific, but if Terry is going through them and someone's like, I know Terry thinks this way, but I, the builder, I really think otherwise. Again, I see how it has I think it goes to the planning commission. It's like there's some type of appeal.
Yeah, they do have
Or something.
an appeal procedure and how.
Yeah, and again, the goal isn't to just, I want to build this, so I'm just going to appeal. I think the standard to go to an appeal needs to be high. I'm just wondering that if there is kind of so at the end of the day, I don't want to put all the pressure on Terry to be like, what if is this consistent or not, or,
Right, are we staffed, right, also to support that just from a,
Yeah, my job's to make Terry's job easier with this whole rewrite.
I approve in the architectural styles that I don't agree with.
Yeah.
And a great point on architectural styles that you made, living in a neighborhood or a block that has a lot of Tudors, right? To your point, if there does become an infill, you can, in a lot of ways, it's probably more appealing for the neighborhood to have, a more modern home that is still fitting with the overall character of the neighborhood versus a 2023 version of a Tudor home, right? Which
Like a
might,
baby one.
right, might look like, the one that we saw, a couple slides ago. But there's also a pretty wide variance. It could look quite a bit differently, right? And people could think differently of basically its inclusion in the neighborhood. So it's, right, you don't want to,
And to your point earlier, I mean, someone wants to build an ugly house, it's their property, like to some degree, right? So it's like, I think it's tough so much of it is just taste and style. So it's like, I think the broader, more flexibility in it is good in a lot of ways, but it opens us up for, it's just interpretation, right? So,
Yeah.
Okay, so we're leaning towards sticking to things like window treatments, materials, the ones that are the important broad ones, and then maybe having a list of we consider fitting in the area. And then if someone wants to appeal for a certain style or design, we could have the planning commission act as the design review board essentially in those circumstances.
I think that makes sense. I mean, I think we don't don't have too many new builds right now, so like it might have to be something that gets revisited if a bunch of new building starts going on, but I think for now, that probably is.
There's a new house going up on Lake Point. I had a challenge. It didn't, to me, it didn't fit in the neighborhood.
Not that one, just to be clear.
Not this one,
Yeah.
not set down 702, 703. And so I sent it out to John Jackson and, let me know your thoughts on it. And he kind of walked me through how it's going to fit, looking at the rest of the block. And so we have access to consultants and design professionals that can guide us through. Okay, maybe here's, we don't have an architectural harmonious section in our ordinance. This house didn't seem to fit to me, but there's other people that support it, how, yeah, it is gonna fit. Because there's some other houses within the neighborhood that are similar.
And then actually probably with our, to piggyback off our comment earlier, do we incorporate utilities, generators, things along those lines into this? And I think we,
Into the setbacks for sure.
Yeah.
Or just essentially the comment that,
Right.
the specific instance you're talking about, I think, right? Something like that, it's not movable, right? It effectively changes the footprint of the house, right?
Mhm. So I think the regulation is it has to be in the rear yard unless neighbor consent is obtained. That is how, I just want to say, that's what the standard is right now.
yeah,
Yeah, with a piece of paper with no description on it.
yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah, I understand the frustration with that one.
Right, and they're much, they are much more common now than they were in the past, right? People use
These
mini
things were built
splits
well before
all the
the
time.
regulations were in.
People also, and probably more so after the last couple of weeks, want to have generators.
Yeah, does that apply to generators too, Terry?
Yeah, we have a new.
Oh, yeah, that's right, we have a whole section on
of generator ordinance that regulates the location.
Start in the back.
So I missed the initial public comment by 2 minutes. I do have a comment on this. Can I give it now, or would you like me to wait till the end of the meeting?
Let's
Whatever's
wait,
convenient for you.
let's wait until we get to the public
We have
comment.
another period for public comment.
Right, just asking since you were on it, but happy to wait.
Yeah, we'll wait until the next public comment period. That's right, sir.
Okay, then the last question I want to talk about on this one is, we already talked about whether design should differ by zoning district, and it sounds like more will describe the area of each neighborhood rather than making districts. And then if duplexes were designed to fit the style of the neighborhood as we're talking about today, would that be acceptable in a single family neighborhood, given the design match, or does that have to do more with the character of the neighborhood overall?
My initial reaction when I read this was it's probably acceptable just by basis of, where our duplexes and our multi-family homes are allowed currently, right, is pretty well defined. And I don't think there's many cases, right, where there's a duplex that's out of eyesight, right, of the next another duplex.
That's not in one of those zoning districts.
Right.
No.
Right, yeah.
Well, what you do have is you have some carriage houses.
Right, yeah.
So I guess the question is also, if duplexes and carriage houses or ADUs were designed to fit the style of the principal home or their neighborhood, would you expand the reach in which they are allowed? For example, and I'm talking about like condo style duplexes where you own a part of it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm open to the idea. I think the majority of the community would not be though. I think the majority of and I understand the majority of the people that live in it on a block, it's all single family homes, want it to maintain all single family homes. I think for right now, that's going to be the cleanest thing done and make the most sense to stick with. I think it does make sense I'm all for more density though, where it makes sense. So maybe it's our commercial corridors that, for mixed use buildings that we allow for the higher densely populated housing.
Like that's a discussion, Warren, of how successful we are in introducing or when we broach the subject more broadly, right, of auxiliary dwelling units.
Yeah, yeah. we're getting-
Different-
Yeah, we're not talking about that one for today. We have to start with.
We'll have a whole
I can't believe I'm saying signs of a low hanging fruit, but, yeah, absolutely. And we are doing open houses in this process too, so that's, some of these can be
Mhm.
open house topics, but and it is something we'll have to talk about though, is if you do have if I have a large, 5,000 square foot house and I have a carriage house, technically it is functionally a two-family property, essentially. So if I wanted to build a 4,000 square foot house right next door and have it designed exactly to look like a single family, and should I just stop talking, Terry, or do you want me to wait?
Dwelling units on a
Yeah,
whole
the
different
ordinance
meeting.
addresses that. If it's a single family zone district, you can build a carriage house, but the use of that carriage house is for
The primary.
occupants of the principal residence.
Mhm.
So it's not, you can't create, that creates an enforcement nightmare because it's somebody could rent it out, but the intent is for the users of the principal residence.
And of our 4 zoning districts, I believe 2 of them allow like the duplexes or multifamily, that would be essentially the Patch and then Harcourt and those few other streets going south of Jefferson. There might be a few other ones scattered about, but
The challenge with allowing a duplex in a single family zone district is one of the things that we probably will address is parking. If you're currently just required 2 parking spaces, but I envision us going down towards 2 enclosed parking spaces, then you've got a duplex, now you get a 4-car garage or 2 garage structures, so you're taking up a lot of your wanted and needed green space, because we need more green space with parking structure, so that kind of naturally addresses itself. You're not gonna build a 2-family in a single family zone district because you've got to build a 4-car garage. So that progression stops itself in the zoning ordinance. If we address enclosed parking instead of just straight, we need 2 parking spaces.
And I'm sure we can do this on another night, but something just to put out there as well is we have a lot of 4-family flats and some 5-unit buildings in the community too. Should there be certain areas that you're allowed to have 4-unit buildings? Should you be allowed to have a 5-unit building? If right now in these zoning districts that we only allow a 2-unit building, if you have a 4-unit building, you pay $450,000 for this 4-unit building, you have a fire, you can only build the 2-unit building on rebuilding it. And so, I think that needs to be addressed. We have a really, like all of the 800-900 block of Beaconsfield is, I think about 90% of it's 4-unit buildings. That's not what the code says. So I think that definitely needs to be addressed. And I think that it's there has, knock on wood, there has not been a loss on one of these buildings, but if something did happen, that could create some hardship for the people that, because a lot of those are even owner occupied, that they live in a unit, rent out the other 3. So I think that needs to be definitely addressed.
Okay. That gives us a lot of fuel for the next meeting. And Warren, would the open house be occurring before the May meeting or after? I can't remember.
I was gonna kind of throw that out at the end of this meeting and see
Okay, we'll talk about that
what the
later.
commission thoughts.
That sounds good.
Maybe even do it in part, I don't know, but
All right. Well, thank you guys for talking about infill design. Let's move on to signage. I'm gonna plug in my sign one so that everyone in the audience can see. Oh, wait, is it attached to this?
it's this, it's all one PDF, scroll up.
Yeah, we went out of order, right?
Yeah, it's like page, it's the very next one.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
So I didn't include the full sign ordinances for all of you from our 3 sample communities because they're very long. Hopefully you had a chance to look at the digitals before this meeting today. For our signage comparison, I chose 3 samples. One is the city of Grosse Pointe, right next door, especially because they have a very specific sign ordinance that I think makes them a little unique. I also chose the city of Ferndale because they have some more commercial corridors that I thought would be comparable to Mack Ave or Jefferson, somewhere like that. And then also the city of Ludington, which I know seems very far away from us, but Ludington just adopted a new sign ordinance in 2021, which means they're thinking about it under the current state laws regarding signage. And also they have, a nice walkable downtown, just like Rosemont Park. So I thought it was a great comparison city. And it's important to note in our conversations that I would like to hear about your thoughts on signage, especially in different commercial districts. So under the new zoning ordinance, we will have different commercial designations depending on what street you're on. So it's totally acceptable to regulate signage separately for Mac Ave as we would for Kirchhoff. Right now, it's all the same. So we probably should separate those a little bit.
I'll introduce, most of our sign regulations are content-based,
Which is not
which
allowed.
we can't do anymore essentially with free speech protections. If you have to read the sign to understand if I can regulate that, that's like a litmus test. So you can look at placement, you can look at dimensions, you can look at material construction, but you can't ours talks about, real estate signs,
Mhm.
messaging sign, it's other ones besides real estate or political signs, that's a whole other can of worms, but essentially, that's what, we're going more towards this, where it's dimensional, it's
About flashing
and then,
lights.
and form and function. And our new ordinance will have these pretty graphics to show clearly with each definition, right? Of
Yeah,
what
very
a
helpful.
sign looks like, what a marquee sign looks like.
Absolutely. And
Right now, it's just words.
Yeah, it's worth noting that you cannot regulate basically on a residential property, someone's personal sign. So if someone puts up a personal sign saying like, F my neighbor, they can have that on their yard. But in commercial districts and industrial districts, we can make a general statement that prohibits profanity and other lewd statements on the sign.
But we could still on the residential side, signs regulate the size,
Mhm.
setback from the property lines,
Yeah.
things like that. It would be,
Absolutely.
maybe the only ones that are allowed are again, like the temporary signs, like you can't
Mhm.
erect like a stone monument that says,
Yeah.
whatever message you want it to say. It would be-
Yeah, and typically, they'll say no more than 3-yard signs during a political season or something like that. So people aren't literally filling their yard with signs because it happens sometimes. Get really
Yep.
enthusiastic with them. So, all right. So I've designed this kind of like a worksheet. We're gonna fill in the acceptable signage types for residential and commercial. And I'm not expecting you today to choose like, oh, we want to do 40% size for an awning sign. That's not really what I'm looking for. I want a discussion about which signage types are acceptable where. So, are awning signs acceptable in MAC but not in Kirchhoff? Those sorts of things. And then once we go through that, we'll talk about sizing because I review signs till the cows come home every single week. And I have some opinions on, what sizing systems are best. So I think I can help you all out there. But let's start going through the list. And I think I have some extra black and white printouts. Gentlemen in the audience would like one just for fun. Anyone in the audience want a black and white one to follow along? Don't want it to.
We expect to have an interactive planning commission.
It's like the approach point first.
Great. Want to make sure, because PowerPoint's a little bit small, so I can just be better. Okie dokie. All right. So first of all, did any of you get a chance to go look at signs this weekend? A few of you? Okay, nice. You don't realize how important signs are until you suddenly have to regulate them. So let's start off with awning signs. So I didn't create separate categories for the high volume commercial streets and the low volume commercial streets in terms of traffic, but just shout out if you want to differentiate between any particular streets. So awning signs in residential districts, typically prohibited. In Ferndale, they do allow awnings to be on homes and they allow awning signs for certain home occupations. I don't really see that as a common feature in Grosse Pointe Park, but I want to know what you guys think. No? Okay. No awnings in residential districts. All right, what about commercial districts? Allowed in all?
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I can't really see, I'm sure you can see a reason why they'd be more common on Kirchhoff than on Jefferson, but I can't see a reason to prohibit them, yeah.
Wasn't there a restaurant or drive-through that on Jefferson?
Oh, I think,
Yeah, well, now it's a bakery.
Yeah, maybe the
Amy's has one.
yeah. So-
and there might be a wine shop might have one. Maybe.
No, but right next to the wine shop, right next to the wine shop, they did, but they got rid of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing to know about awnings is that some communities regulate the colors because really light colored awnings can often stain much more easily. So is that something that we would want to include, like, you know, relegating awnings to darker color palettes? It's okay if you don't want to, I'm curious.
Or do you regulate that the awnings have to remain,
Be
they
clean.
have to be
I think
clean and stained, right?
Clean appearance that's consistent with the.
Yeah.
Maintenance standards need to apply to all signage, right?
What about striping
Yeah, stripy awnings.
Or polka dotted awnings, checkerboard.
Solid.
Solid.
Solid, yeah.
Well, I mean, striping looks pretty good on a lot of awnings. I think like La Rouge might have.
Oh, it does.
Yeah, looks great.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe you're saying
Striping
vertical
or
stripes.
solid, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so vertical
Yeah.
stripes or solid.
Yeah.
the cabbage patches pattern on there. Decorative pattern.
Okay. So we'll say select other patterns. And this is something, signs are typically reviewed by the building department and sometimes they send them out to us for additional help. But
Could ask
this-
for a variance too, right?
you could ask for variance or you could just say additional patterns are up to the discretion of the
I
administrator.
wouldn't call it a variance, I would just call it a,
A discretionary choice.
yeah, because when you say variance, there's a whole bunch of legal implications of granting a variance versus
Yeah,
just giving us a higher threshold of a review standard.
I didn't mean to hit a.
No, I just gotta protect the city.
Yeah, if something is administratively reviewed, you can absolutely say additional patterns may be granted by the planning department on administrative review. That's perfectly fine.
What about the shape of one, like barrel shape versus a plain awning?
So I mean, like rounded on the top.
Right.
versus-
Belting is barrel shaped ones, looks great.
Okay, so all shapes are pretty okay.
Yeah.
All right, banner signs. Banner signs are most often regulated as a form of temporary sign. We don't let businesses keep banner signs, but often, if they're having their main sign manufactured or you're having an event where you have a banner sign, that's what you'd be looking at. So for example, the City of Grosse Pointe allows banner signs in commercial districts as temporary only. And they say it has to be the same size as whatever your wall sign is going to be when your wall sign is complete. Whereas Ferndale doesn't allow even temporary banner signs, but they do allow them for events to go across the streets. So thoughts on banners?
I've always wondered if it was for an event, though, don't you have to read it in order to regulate it, or no, that's a little.
Well, event meaning going across the roadway. So when you're hanging over the street from two light poles, that's what they call an event banner.
Gotcha, okay, so it's just it's a technical definition, not
Yeah.
a, hey, Chili Fest or something, or after 6 on Kirkville.
Yeah, you don't have to read it. It basically means you're putting it.
Gotcha, okay, gotcha, no,
Wouldn't that give us specific regulatory authority because it's a public way?
It would, yeah. So they specify the maximum size for a permitted regulatory banner.
Right.
Yeah, thoughts on temporary banners
I feel
or?
like temporary seems like it makes most sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just be careful with the time period for
Right,
temporary.
that was the only-
Just because in a previous community I worked in, you could have like 3 different temporary permits a year, each one for 60 days, and it, yeah, so we got a little carrot to it.
You could make it through an entire
Yeah.
season, is what you're,
And then,
is what you're
Yeah, and
saying.
then also the inflatable guy, well, those are called signs too, we don't want that one.
Okay, and no banners in residential districts. Okay, canopy signs. So canopy signs are those metal signs that you'll often see that are either flat or slatted and they pop out away from the building like an awning, but they don't have a top to them. They're just suspended by 2 metal bars. Does anyone know a good example of something like that? Try to think of a business that has one.
I know something, but I can't think of something in the park.
The
Yeah.
Cadillac Hotel. I think, right?
Mhm. Yeah, or like the Savoy Hotel, if you've ever seen a picture of that in London, has one of those big metal.
Oh,
It's not a good
So it just
example.
comes out and is flush across the front, out and.
Yeah, out and then completely vertical. So it's be like, if this is the building, right? sticks out this way. And it's empty in the center. There's nothing, there's no roof. There might be glass
Oh, yeah.
sometimes.
DAC main entrance.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Without
Okay,
the
so
glass and without the glass enclosure like the
Mhm.
original.
Yeah, they're hard to envision a little bit.
Like Cass Cafe had something like that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so would you allow canopy signs in any districts, all districts, or just some?
Say all,
All the commercial districts? Okay. And any specifications on whether or not they can have glass over the open portion? Shield people from rain, or do you want them to be fully open?
I would,
property owner discretion.
Yeah, I would say the same thing.
Glass, okay. If it's clean. All right, display board or plaque signs. So display board or plaque signs are not the same as the temporary signs that say hiring now. These are really the ones that are mounted to the sides of businesses that say like the law offices of PG Esquire, you know what I mean? The ones that are actually mounted to the facade. So in Grosse Pointe, these are very small unless you are in a multi-tenant building, in which case you can have one that's about this big that says all the different offices. Whereas in Ferndale and Ludington, they do allow a larger size. I think Ludington is technically the largest in that they allow it to be 4.5 feet tall, which is pretty tall from far away. And it might be worth considering different sizes in the downtown area versus the streets where you're mostly automotive traffic.
anyone ever seen a sign that they thought was offensively big on a business?
131 Churchill,
131.
that's a Grosse Pointe Farms.
Hmm.
It's an out of place directory sign.
Okay.
It's way too big.
Is it multi-tenant?
Yeah, it's multi-tenant.
Okay.
Ton of construction.
So I just find in, at least in Grosse Pointe and across most of Grosse Pointe, a lot of signage is way too small, like you can't even see what's in there, so.
Right, I agree. When I found myself looking through a lot of these and I was just trying to, wrap my head around.
Okay, 9 square feet.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it, I was like, well, if you're traveling by car,
Yeah, right.
it's probably the, a size that makes.
So I think definitely bigger than what we have now,
To even have them now.
I think it's interesting with Ferndale, how it's based on the facade size, because there's some areas that I think it makes sense to have. It looks fine if it's larger, especially if it's a multi-tenant building, and then some that, it doesn't. So I think a percentage of facade could make sense.
Are these typically not the sign for the building? Like if I'm in the Savoy building, and then I'm in, Dr. So-and-so suite 105, it's gonna be the directory
Yes,
of the tenants inside that building. So
typically.
I don't think it's intended for, if you're driving down the street, to look for that address or.
Yeah, right.
It's more of here's the directory of people that are in this building.
Mhm.
I don't know on Beaconsfield, right behind the wine shop, there's a multi-tenant space above that, and there's a nice size directory sign on the side of it, on that side door. Who's in that?
And some communities that have alleys will put these on the rear side of the building, you know what I mean? So
That's what I was just gonna ask too, if this would apply to the rear of the building too,
it can.
right? To identify
Yeah, we're
where you wanna go in.
We're
So I
actually
know on the-
requiring that in our new CFO process, we're requiring address and business names on the back doors as well as the front.
So you could say these are allowed if not required in the alley, the alley entrances. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a display board, but you can require just some sort of signage on the rear of the building.
I guess I view this if it's more of a directory. I'm sure there's probably always an example of someone who, to your point, does have one that's grossly oversized. I don't know, I just wonder, right, depending upon if you're too restrictive in terms of the size, right? If I'm thinking of something that's like a doctor's office, right? And it has a lot of tenants, right, within a building. Maybe that's unlikely for us, right, in our community, but I don't know, eliminating it to 2 square feet, right? It's like necessarily.
It's 2 foot by 1 foot.
Right, yeah.
It's pretty small. The other thing that some communities like Grosse Pointe have is they require that the sign each line, if it's different tenants, be made of the same material. And they actually go as far to say the same font. So something to think about as well. I think material is great. Of course, you want a cohesive look to a directory sign. Font,
I think material is fine. I think font would indicate that like, they have, your business has its own typeface or font or, logo, right? So I would think that allowing some differentiation is fine if you have a consistent material.
Is Grosse Pointe's 2 square foot, is that, can they have as many display plaques as they want?
Nope.
As long as it equals?
One.
So the total on the facade of the thing can only add up, combined, all the names,
Mhm.
can only combine, okay, 2 square foot, yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree, that's kind of small.
Yeah, that's really small, because then the building I referred to, I think it's 14 office spaces.
Right.
Yeah, so it's usually better to say one per facade and this is the maximum size. So you don't have people installing multiple signs to
It may
compensate.
be limited by the number of offices. And it's gonna naturally scale itself by, if I've got a 14 tenant space, I need this many square feet to have a readable font. So maybe you're limiting the overall size by like number of tenants that fill it in. So
Yeah, that's fair.
just to start, there's obviously they could all change to one tenant, if that's only by small building. But again, they're gonna be limited by the size, just, it's kind of hard to say what's too small, what's too big.
Like 5 square feet plus 20% for each additional
Yeah.
tenant over two, I don't know, just.
2 square feet is clearly too small for a
Mhm.
14 tenant building.
Definitely.
I guess we also want to make it, user friendly, right, for the people, so it's get it a 5 square feet plus 20% for, and we may be
Yeah.
overcomplicating up.
Yeah, probably not one size fits all.
Mhm.
Well, I think the Ferndale approach kind of implicitly gets around all that by expressing it as a percent of the facade.
Yeah.
And I should mention in Ferndale and Ludington, when they mention these, in the Ludington residential district, it's up to 32 square feet. That's because there are schools and churches in the residential district. They don't have a separate semi-public district for those uses. So when you're seeing that, that's because they're specifying those regulations.
I was curious, 32 square feet on
Yeah.
houses.
Yeah. So that.
Bar and stuff.
Yeah.
So depending on how the zoning district is structured in the end, we'll do something similar, to accommodate those kinds of semi-public uses like religious institutions. Actually, schools are funded by the state of Michigan in any way, we can't regulate their signage. So,
Or anything.
or anything
As far
about
as
it.
mine goes.
Yep, absolutely. So if they're truly private, like not a single state dollar goes to them, you can regulate their signage. So we do include measures for it, just in that circumstance, but it's not very common. All right, well, let's go to the next page. Entranceway signs. You'll see at the top, we have entranceway, and at the bottom, we have monument. Some communities don't choose to differentiate between these two. Some just call them all the same thing. Really what makes an entranceway sign different is that they're typically those residential subdivision signs that say, welcome to Woody Manor, or whatever it is, right? And given that Grosse Pointe is a mostly built-out community, I would encourage you to just combine them into one category for simplification's sake. So let's look at both entranceway and monument at the same time. So in the residential district,
Actually, it looks like it's the same.
they're
right?
roughly the same.
For Ferndale, Ludington, it is.
Just Grosse Pointe, but yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's because Grosse Pointe says only in the residential district do they have to have these pillars on the side. And then in the commercial district, you don't have to have the side end cap things. But yeah, so thoughts on monument or entranceway signs in the residential district?
I guess my thought is we've never had any sort of regulations around this currently, and are there any residential monument or entranceway or freestanding signs that anybody can think of?
There are some houses that have, if they're on corners, they'll have something in the corner of the lot with the address on it. There's one on 3 Mile, at 3 Mile in Kercheval.
Of on, it's not the Grosse Pointe, but like Windermere, right? Like the, in Grosse Pointe Farms, they have a Windermere plaque, and those are an association, but,
I don't think we have any housing associations in the park, so.
well, I mean, let's say there's a, one of the big piece of the property gets subdivided from there and there's a new development, are we gonna permit that they have a sign branding that development?
Or what if somebody wants to name their 5-tenant building?
Yeah.
You know, I'll put a name on my building. You know, put a sign up, that's pretty common, they have a sign up.
Like townhomes or something like that.
Yeah, so maybe just not for single family residential, but for multifamily and residential and obviously for commercial, I think it makes sense, right?
And again, we'll consider churches and schools and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, then let's talk about commercial monument signs. So we don't have very many, as many of you seen. I think we have, 2 on Jefferson, something like that. One's the multi-tenant sign that's right down there. And I don't even know if you could fit one.
I was gonna say, that's likely the only place.
Yeah.
Maybe Van Jefferson is so big, I don't think we're gonna put much in it's the county right away. I don't really see monument signs going up anytime soon on Jefferson.
Well, they have to be within the property boundary. So if someone has a really far setback building, they could conceivably put a monument sign near where, if they put the parking in front and the buildings in the back, they could locate one out there. So something to think about, do we want to allow monument signs in the commercial district, period? Or any commercial district out of the several that will be established in the city?
The Arts Center, they will have some signage. Our revision to the code should
I
anticipate that,
right.
that something like a monument sign might be appropriate.
I think most monument signs that look very good. So I
I almost think that makes more sense on like the Mac or Jefferson.
Well, I just think you would never see it on
Yeah, you would never
virtual,
put
right?
it
So
on. You'd put
it's- you could permit it, but how could you possibly install one?
Yeah, right.
Right.
I agree, I like a monument sign. There is an example of what I envision is the gas station, the pole type signs now, which I'm not a fan of pole type signs, and I think that that particular site could put a monument sign. If you look at I'm gonna go to Grosse Pointe Farm again, the BP gas station at Mac and Ross took their pole type sign down and have a monument sign, which is, a little more traffic friendly, it's not as imposing. You can set it a little closer to the road, it's still, that particular one is too close to the road, but you can set it closer to the road and a pole sign without it, if it falls over, is damaged, where it would fall into the public right of way, things of that nature. The multiple pole signs over there are, I don't know if anybody's from the gas station, I did think they were nice.
And I would say most communities are regulating out pole signs these days.
Yeah,
just
they are.
because they're kind of a hazard to maintain. They generally fall into disrepair, I would say, people just don't keep them as much. So most communities are requiring monument signs, and then some will say, for 30 inches above grade, it has to be built to a masonry base. And, around that, maybe a little bit of landscaping, something like that. Is that the approach we would want to take?
I think it
I
makes
would think
sense.
so, yeah.
Okay. And then it's also something to bring up, in the middle of this same page, we have freestanding signs, which some communities treat differently from one another, including the city of Grosse Pointe. Ludington is pretty generalist about them, as is Ferndale, but we could also just eliminate the category of freestanding sign altogether, and then, eliminate the definition and not have to deal with what is freestanding versus a
I was
monument.
gonna say, when I looked through this, I could see where, obviously with the, with the diagram, but I don't know that what you would expect from the sign would differ drastically, right, between freestanding entranceway and monument.
Okay, then we can just eliminate that category. And historic signs, like if you historically designated a property, those would still be permitted, that's a separate.
I guess, well, on a freestanding sign, like the little drawing there to the far right. And what you had mentioned, it's a, not a monument sign, it's not a full foundation poured, it's on two poles, sits like 3 feet off the ground, right? Is that a monument sign or would that be a freestanding sign?
That would be a freestanding sign, but I think what Terry's suggesting is that we don't allow poles altogether.
So Terry, you're saying even if it's a lower sitting pole sign with 2 poles in the
That
ground?
would be a pole type or freestanding sign.
Okay. So as someone who installed 2 of these on my office building, I was gonna do monument signs, and then I saw the cost of doing 2 monument signs, and I said, I'm not doing monument signs. And so like, just for, we rely on small businesses, and spending $20,000 to $30,000 on a sign that's a ton of money. And so, again, not that we're running too much into this problem, I think, in Grosse Pointe Park, but, for me and my business, we have 2 signs that are not big enough, but we have them. And they're freestanding signs, but they sit low to the ground. We poured foundations for them, and they're easy to maintain. They're small. They're easy to maintain. So I would personally say that, that kind of freestanding sign, I think just is practical.
Okay,
They're on
I'm
a
saying,
foundation though.
Yeah, they're on a foundation.
There's not air or free space.
There is 2 footings poured,
Okay.
that the poles sit in, and there's air and then landscaping around them.
Maybe it's just a landscaping requirement or something.
I maybe just like footings have to be poured, right? Because I think where the maintenance thing comes into an issue is if they're just stuck into the ground, right? So it's like maybe it's a freestanding sign as long as there's a footings poured.
or maybe there's a limitation to how far the sign face can be from the ground.
Yeah,
So you don't
right.
have something that's under
Yeah.
the tall legs, that's
Yeah.
not up a certain.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, and that's also something to bring up, that often directional signs for like enter, exit are on those poles. So maybe it is a good category to keep, because we need to consider those kinds of signs as well. Okay, so maybe height and size limitations to freestanding signs would make them acceptable.
And the setback,
It's 2 poles.
they should be set back at least equal to the height of the sign on the property. And not create a site distance problem at intersections and driveways.
Did you say two poles?
I don't know, I just said that, but don't listen to me.
No, I mean, I
2
honestly,
poles versus 1, I don't know if that makes a difference or not.
it definitely makes the signs more stable.
Yeah.
So I think that's actually a really important thing to include.
The material could also be something that's, right, the actual construction of the poles, right, that you're using. Like you even mentioned it just with having a poured footer, right, as opposed to just a standard. Right.
So you're saying metal or masonry pole, basically, something strong.
I mean, maybe not whatever it is specifically, but maybe in order to balance the fact that you need something that's cost effective for businesses while also wanting to make sure it's not an eyesore, right? Maybe there's consideration to what we allow in terms of, the actual construction of the pole, the freestanding sign itself.
This is your sign.
That's my sign.
Okay, that's what we were talking about.
Yeah, you can't
That looks
see it.
nice.
Yeah, no, that's.
Yeah, that doesn't even look, yeah.
Yeah, you can't read it, but I'll be calling Terry about that one eventually at some point, but if you're stuck right there, you get out of your car.
Oh, you mean for a sign that is erected on a corner where you have people approaching on both sides?
Not necessarily a corner, I'm trying to think of, it's a church, if I'm gonna go against the farms, it's a V, literally a V-shaped sign. So it, instead of a two sides, it's, it's got more of a reveal to it, you can see it more dimensionally. How would you count it? If you've got a sign, monuments, typical monument sign, and you've got your square footage, now I'm gonna make it, say just a 90-degree, how do you count that square footage? It's not visible necessarily from more than one side, but you can, you see more square footage than, I'm trying to have a hard time explaining.
Yeah, I know
But
exactly.
a
what you
V-shaped
mean.
sign, something that you open up and now you've got
Yeah.
more than your 4 square feet, 6 square feet.
So- Most other communities would say your maximum sign square footage is 48 square feet. A sign like this that just has two sides that are flush with each other, that would be, this plus this, this times this, 48 square feet. Once you split it into a V sign, it would be 48 square feet across both of these faces and the V. So you wouldn't have instead of it being like
You're not at
this,
96 square.
it'd be like this, yeah.
At what point do you say,
What angle?
yeah,
That's a great point, we should
20
include that
degrees,
probably.
45 degrees, 90 degrees, at what point?
Mhm.
At what point do you essentially count both facades towards the, right?
Let's see. I have to think about angles in my head. Think about that a long time. 45 is actually pretty severe when you think about what 45 looks like in real life. So I would honestly say something more like 15 would be pretty reasonable. Okay, great for bringing that up. Thank you. Okay, all right, let's move on to flags. So most communities don't regulate flags because they're often a form of, of just expressing free speech. But I do recommend what Ferndale has, which is a maximum flagpole height. If anything, it's just easier to maintain. Like I said, schools can't be regulated anyway, so if the school wants to put up a 60-foot flagpole, they're gonna. But it's usually good to have something for when someone comes by and asks about it.
Yeah, makes sense.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay, do we like 30 feet as a height? Is that fine?
sounds great.
Sure.
Sounds good. All right, marquee signs. So interestingly enough, in Grosse Pointe, there is not a size limit to the marquee signs, but there is a text size limit to the marquee signs. So specifically, Grosse Pointe regulates how tall the changeable text can be that you put in for changing like the movie titles or whatever. But the overall sign size, they don't limit because they're just so rare. They're not a very common sight in time. And then similarly in Ferndale, there's no area limit, but they do have a minimum height for clearance for walkers. So thoughts on marquees?
I think having the minimum height certainly makes sense, and it seems like that's basically pretty much what's consistent, right, between the locations that allow it. I can't see, I guess, a reason to not permit a marquee. I mean, we have a new construction on Kirchville, right, where there's right in the oyster bar, right, that has the
balcony.
right, the balcony that to me, if you're going to permit a balcony overhanging the sidewalk, I couldn't see what the justification would be to not allow a marquee or a sign.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, that sounds good. All right, let's move on to the next page then. Similarly for projecting signs, which are those hanging pennant signs that businesses have, there's usually a minimum height. I would say if you're gonna set it at 8.5 or 9 for a marquee, I would do the exact same for a projecting sign.
Could those also be potentially just combined or is there like a reason to have marquee and projecting as
Slightly different. Marquees are usually illuminated internally. So a projecting sign is really just a flat face object. So that's really why they're different.
So like a marquee would almost be defined as like trapezoid type.
It could include one of those, yeah, absolutely. Whereas projecting is like the hanging, swinging sign type.
Yeah.
So I should mention Grosse Pointe regulates these like very specifically. They say you have to have a black wrought iron, like certain amount of detail, holder that projects out with the signs to create a very cohesive feeling to the downtown district. Whereas other communities, as long as it's on some pole or something holding up, they don't really mind. So what are your thoughts on the level of detail regulating projecting signs?
Gary, you said you really like the farms
I
on
do.
this.
The farms actually started the whole, I call them a shingle sign. The shingle sign, 15 or 17 years ago. And there's a lot of different styles up there, because people have their logo, their identity, and they're putting it out on that sign. I kind of like it up there a little bit. It's a little different than Grosse Pointe City. Where they do the consistency in the mast arms and but I like the variety
In the farm.
up in the farms, and it's kind of nice.
You
And
guys,
the height, because we plow the walks here, the holder height is 7'4", I think. So we need to be mindful of how high, it needs to be at least 8 feet from the lowest portion of the sign.
yeah, if you guys are okay with that, we'll look to the farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like variety.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, great, sandwich board. So, I'm honestly amazed that Grosse Pointe allows a 5-foot height sandwich board, 1 foot wide, 5 feet tall. But hey, everyone's different. So, sandwich boards are typically only allowed in the commercial district, although Ferndale allows them residential, again, for uses that are not necessarily residential in those districts. Yeah, thoughts on maximum sandwich board size?
This is normally a temporary sign too, right?
Mhm.
Okay, yeah. So
Yeah.
okay, clear, it's not.
Like
Yeah.
during business hours kind of thing, it like seems to be.
Yeah, you can take them in at night.
Yeah,
Seasonal.
yeah. I just want to get that out there. We're not gonna, once we open it up, we're not gonna leave it there till the end of time.
Right, no, I'd probably they'll run amok of somebody else, right?
Yeah.
So the estate sale and the real estate sandwich boards aren't allowed because they're always in residential areas.
So the estates, there's sandwich board signs for estate sale?
Open house signs, yeah, no, they're allowed,
Oh, okay.
but they're allowed during Sundays 2 to 4. So, and if you're having, and then we have certain days that you're allowed to have like broker opens during the week, you're allowed to have them out during those specified times.
Okay, so there's something special for those, but then the
Yeah.
estate sale ones, they have sandwich boards.
Yeah, and I think it's permitted during certain times during the week.
All right, we can't regulate based on content.
Yeah, but we
We
could say.
can't call it an estate sale sign, we can just say, sandwich board signs can only be used,
A yard sign, right?
Yeah,
in
more than
residential areas for temporary
4 hours.
purposes, yeah.
But in certain of the points, like growth, like the parks and city and farms are generally okay if you like put a sandwich board up for an open house on like the near the road off like Jefferson or something like that. In Grosse Pointe Shores, the police will literally pick up your open house sign if you do that and bring it to your open house or just take it, so I don't know if like placement of sandwich board signs has to be like on.
Yeah, we can specify placement, probably best.
Or do we not even need to go there? I don't know.
I don't know if you need to go there. It's always good to say it has to be on the interior of the sidewalk, if there's a sidewalk along the front, just so it's.
We basically never allow signs in the public right of way.
Yeah.
Regardless if they're temporary or.
Yeah.
Any kind of others. Oh,
Yeah, like
I live in your garage sale, I put it in my
We
front
got like
yard,
Sprout
lots of songs.
House, so like in like, some of the bakery, they'll put their signs out on, which I think is fine,
Yeah.
Well, the sandwich board signs that are on Kirchhoff, they'd have to get it, probably get an annual permit and, provide a hold harmless agreement. And the liability to the city, because it's in the public way. If somebody on a bicycle or hit it, the city can be liable for, somebody else's sandwich. And some jobs of the administrative that want good stuff. You're welcome.
I think that's a really good point, because you definitely don't want to block disability access either, when someone using a mobility device in the public right of way, that sort of stuff. All right, the next one is transported signs. These are almost universally banned, because I'm pretty sure everyone agrees they're pretty obnoxious. So, of course, you can't control if someone's driving through your city, but you can control if they stop in a parking spot to advertise Qdoba on one of those, trucks. So, thoughts?
That sounds good.
Yep. Great. Vehicle signs are typically not specified because, again, they're mobile, or someone might have a dog grooming business that's portable and they park their van in their driveway, right? So most communities don't want to discourage home businesses by regulating vehicle signs. What are your thoughts? Okay.
I hadn't even heard of that until this sheet. I've seen most of the other ones. but-
Yep, absolutely. All right, on to wall signs. So,
Can I go back to the vehicle signs real quick?
Sure.
Can you couple that, you don't want, if somebody's driving it as for their work vehicle, I think that's a little different than, I work for DTE and I pull my DTE truck in my driveway. Can you couple the signage on your vehicle with the size of the car, or if it's got an equipment rack on it or something where you would, say, no, we don't want that?
Absolutely. Cities can regulate whatever types of vehicles are parked
That's something
outside.
that you wanna consider, like, yeah, you can have a sign on your car, if that's what you're driving to work every day. But you don't wanna have it on the side of your car if it's got a ladder rack and it's a 10,000 pound thing. That's different, so. I don't know if it's something that the board wants to address or not.
I think that might be a regular city code regulation, because most cities have a specific section on parked vehicles in residential districts that prohibit RVs, heavy duty vehicles over a certain weight capacity,
Okay.
you know, those sorts of things. So I think we would probably add that to the general code rather than zoning code. Okay, wall signs. So without talking about the size of wall signs right now, wall signs in residential districts and commercial districts.
I think it makes sense to go off the facade because there's some buildings that it makes sense to have a bigger one, other ones it doesn't. So I think adopting something more similar to Ferndale or Ludington.
I thought the Ludington, based off the width of the actual facade itself seemed. Saw no real issue with that.
Okay, sounds good. And I have seen communities where they set like a maximum letter height of 16 inches, and then you have this hilariously tiny sign on a massive facade. So percentages are usually a good way to go, and then some communities will set percentage plus a maximum square footage. So say like 50% up to 90 square feet, or something like that, whatever is less. Okay,
So just to clarify, that's the portion of the facade that is associated with your piece of the building is allowed for your sign. So if there's someone on the second floor that's not you, they get 10% of that facade, right, for their sign.
yes, if they had open area. If they just have a roof, then they'll need to do a plaque sign advertising their second story business.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't want it to be where the first floor business uses up all the signage, square footage for their events.
I think that's a good point. Specify sizes for multi-story. And the other thing that I want to ask about wall signs is some communities prohibit panel signs, which is essentially those signs where you have a metal box around the outside and it's one flat plastic panel that has the description of the business in it. And they specify that you can only have freestanding letters, the ones that are actually individually carved out. So thoughts on that type of regulation in one, some, or all the district?
Trouble visualizing it.
Well, St. Harbor has a flat box sign.
Oh,
right?
that's true, right?
So we have that like in the main business district.
Okay, we can think about it later.
I mean, I think probably the bigger consideration are businesses along the MAC corridor. What the signs there might look like.
Yeah, panel signs are generally considered to be like slightly cheaper looking, I would say, in part because they are literally cheaper to manufacture. So,
And so what is the panel sign? It's,
sure, so let's see if I can doodle one.
Isn't a panel sign, would the panel sign also be something that could be backlit as well?
Yes, panel signs can be backlit.
you just put this, now I understand, now I
So
understand.
this would be a panel sign,
Yeah,
whereas a freestanding sign, each letter is
Box.
yeah,
its
right,
own like that, yeah.
I got it.
Plastic.
I think as long as they're maintained, I don't see a reason to
Yeah, right.
disallow them.
Yeah,
Oh, all right.
I think Summer Palace has a panel sign.
Right, yeah.
I think it goes well with the vibes for Summer Palace.
Right, yeah.
Oh, yeah, summer house, that's.
Yeah.
And I think they do probably allow for a certain degree, like, creativity that would be harder to execute and, like an individually carved or painted or,
The Indian place has a panel sign too.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I got, yeah.
Some places will also limit the number of colors that can go on a panel sign. Any thoughts on that? Like no more than 3 or no more than 4?
So, yeah.
We could probably go back to the same.
Until somebody does it.
If you wanna have an
Yeah.
ugly, right, yeah, if you wanna have an ugly house or.
Maybe it's in the eye.
Right, exactly.
All right, let's go on to the next one then. Window signs. The window signs are all those little extra bits that businesses like to put up. Exceptions to this are places selling liquor or marijuana, which are required by the state to have a certain amount of window coverage. So thinking about that separately, you know, you're not allowed to see inside, for example, a marijuana business. The state says absolutely not. But you can still regulate whether or not those marijuana businesses cover their window in signage selling marijuana or signage that is just, you know, like a clear opaque film. Again, we don't have marijuana here in Grosse Pointe Park, but it's an example, right? So a window sign could be the ones that say, you know, we sell Gatorade inside, or the ones that say buy lotto tickets here, the ones that advertise which people you have on staff today, whatever it is. Most communities limit them to a certain percentage of the window area. Some of them also say that they have to be condensed in a way, rather than like a long strip or pieced across different sections of the window. Thoughts on window signs in general?
I'm gonna just say that it per, if you have multiple windows, or if you have a really, really big window, you know, you gotta accommodate all those different situations, so there's some nuance to it.
The ordinance does address it already. It's a little, needs to be tightened up a little bit, but, you know, it does address it. And historically, we've never counted, the address or
Like phone numbers.
telephone number, an email address, Facebook page, things like that. We don't count all of that in the signage, just their logo, and, you know, what am I marketing?
Yeah.
So is it 10% of each available window space? So if there's divided windows, it's 10% of that, or one large?
Right, so
Yep.
here's a good example. If, it would be 10% of this entire window area, not all of the windows, because they're, you know, 10%, 10%, 10%, because it's divided.
So if you have 10 windows of the same size, they wouldn't let you cover up one window entirely and leave the other 9 blank. It would be 10%
Okay, so the
of each
available space
individual.
per, I got you, okay.
Mhm. So we're okay with percentage?
Yeah.
Cool. And then yard signs. So as I mentioned, we cannot regulate the content of a yard sign. And these are typically, when we're talking about yard signs, can mean temporary signs. So typically in the residential district or sometimes the commercial district, advertising renovations, sales, you know, political opinions, those sorts of things. Size is very common to regulate. Ludington is smaller than other places. I would say 2.25 square feet is the standard political sign manufacturing size, whereas 6 square feet is larger for commercial signs.
Is there a limitation on the duration that the sign can be up? Like in the political season, is there a window of time that those can come up and then they have to come down?
Yeah, we can set one, absolutely.
Is there one existing now? There's not one now.
I don't think so. That's what
I think there is.
I think there is for certain things, like, if you have a construction project, your construction sign's supposed to come down in a certain amount of time after its final approval.
I think political signs are mentioned, but they're mentioned in such a way that regardless of what the requirement is, just because we're calling it a political sign, we can't enforce it. So it would just be a temporary, you know, a yard sign, you know, we could still maybe put only between the months of blah, you know. I don't even know if we can go that far, but I know the Shores had a lot of issues with this a few years ago, and I think they settled on you could have no more than 5 temporary yard signs at a time, and they have to be, you know, cardboard or plastic, and they may have a time requirement too, but they probably have the most up-to-date sign regulations for residential yard signs and all the points, because I looked at this when I kind of first got here of the issue of signs, and then I'm like, we got a lot of other stuff to look at too. Zoning, but no, the Shores was actually ahead in this specific sign area, so they might be a good model.
And the challenge with political signs is you might want to say take them down 30 days after the election, but that would also technically apply to real estate signs or rebuild signs or anything else that's a yard sign. So we can't really set those exact date limits, but we would for a political sign. But we usually 30 days, that sort of stuff is pretty common. And the state of Michigan has issued guidance on yard signs as well, because they know it's a pretty common issue.
Going back to window signs. Is that where we would want to consider like neon signs too and those kinds of illumination?
Yeah, absolutely. So most communities have a totally separate section that lists the acceptable and unacceptable types of illumination. So genuine neon, like the gaseous neon, lots of communities say that's great as long as you maintain it. But those strip LED lights where you can see each individual LED bulb is often around like gas station windows, most communities prohibit those, for example. So I think we'll have a separate section that talks about which types of illumination are acceptable. But that's a great question. Is neon an acceptable type?
Right.
In a commercial district?
I would think so, yeah.
I think right now it's, no.
They are allowed, they're not allowed to be flashing, blinking, changing. You can have a sign that says open.
Right, an open sign, but can like your exterior facade sign be a neon?
I don't believe we allow that.
Right, that's what I don't think we've allowed. We allow it to the window
If
or,
you've got a window sign and it
Yeah.
doesn't exceed 10% of your window area, you can have a sign that says open. Now, when you get to 10%, that should be all of your sign. Can't be open and then, Joe's
Yeah.
Market.
Okay.
The total window area, max 10% of all the signage.
Mhm.
I also think that should count towards your total allowable signage. If you've got a total, say we use I have a 30-foot storefront, I'm allowed 30 total square feet of signage. My marquee sign or my banner sign or whatever, my sign van sign is a certain amount, and then my window signage, your total amount of signage should exceed a certain percentage of your storefront.
Yeah, so you can choose between like projecting sign and a wall sign. You can't have a projecting sign and a wall sign and a window sign and a roof sign, all those types.
You got like two or no more than two different types, pretty common. Like 3 depending on, tenancy and size of the building.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, billboards. There aren't any billboards in Grossman Park on Mac, are there? On the roof?
Sign on the power side of Mac, right?
Not that I saw. Okay, most communities prohibit billboards because they just become a total headache to permit. So do we want to keep going with that?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
One of my other clients is currently being sued over prohibiting billboards, but that's because they did it after one was installed. So,
Warren, do you feel like you need more things to deal with? Would you like to allow billboards?
all right, portable signs. So portable signs is a very broad category, but you can almost think of it as event signs, right? Signs that you bring with you when you're doing a pop-up for Girl Scout cookies, or you're doing something else where you're taking your signage around with you and then setting it up at your location. Most communities either allow portable signs generally or completely prohibit them. And when someone has a portable sign, they're usually relegated to a pretty small size. So thoughts on portable signs in general? They can just be prohibited if you would like.
I'm still trying to just think of an example of this. What would this look like?
that'd be one of those signs you can put on the back of a trailer with like wheels on them and throw them on a sidewalk or something.
Yeah, almost like it's like different from a sandwich board, but a sign that comes with you for different things. Do you have a better example, Terry, of a portable sign?
All that comes to my mind is the same.
So we could just eliminate the category altogether.
Yeah.
If we don't reference the category.
I don't know what it is.
I'm picturing like somebody for like, I think Liberty Tax Service, they have people like stand on at intersections,
Yeah.
and
Oh, yeah.
signs around, is that?
Does that count? It's attached to it.
Yeah, I don't know, that's the only thing I can.
That's a guy who
Really tails it, yeah.
Right,
That's an article of clothing.
That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, those will be called off-premises signs. Most communities say that you can't have an off-premises sign within 10 feet of your building.
Okay.
They keep you from doing those dinners really far away from your business.
Not that one.
And then incidental and accessory signs, so that's signs like health code ratings or fire access signs, that sort of stuff. Most communities just regulate the size and not necessarily the number because the government usually tells you what signs you have to have in your window. And oftentimes you don't want to prohibit someone from putting up something important.
A portable sign would be like a wind sail, and those fabric.
Yeah, it could be, those flag ones that you see
Yeah.
on lawn extension, that would be a portable sign.
Yeah, that was
Mhm.
a nightmare in my last community.
Yeah, those are not fun. Not fun to regulate.
I haven't really seen any in the park since I've been here.
Yeah.
The gas station tries to put them up.
Yeah, I don't think that's aesthetically compatible.
And they get dirty and faded so fast. So I don't recommend those either.
That was one of the ones that was allowed for 3 6-day
Point Harbor,
periods. and-
Point Harbor uses those, right? I don't think they put anything on them.
Point Harbor uses.
Yeah, I don't think they have anything written on them. I think they're just
Mhm.
It's very common for
pointing
car
or something.
dealerships.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. All right,
I have a couple of things that aren't covered on your table.
yeah.
Rooftop signs.
Oh, yeah. So, sometimes businesses will put like a sign on this bracing on the top of their roof to advertise what the business is. It's almost like it's built off of a flat roof, right? The best one I can think of is old time hotels would often have, their sign is built on these metal braces that stick up from the actual height of the building. Thoughts on
Doesn't
rooftop signs?
Mike's Blades and Boards has one, right?
Yeah, the coin shop up in, Mike's Place of Boards is above there. The coin shop up on that, their sign extends above the roof line.
Nor Jahan is on the roof line, I think, as well.
And I think that's on the mansard. I don't know if that's the same thing.
Oh, that would be different.
Yeah, that's a wall sign.
Cause I've seen it, I see a lot of commercial buildings that, it has some on Mac that have a shingled sloped roof and they have on there, the roof sign
Yeah,
on the
it's kind of
shingle.
it's that bridge between, is it a mansard, so it's on the roof, or is it there, or is it a constructed awning?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of that's common on that.
Yeah, typically if
But
it's
anything above that roof,
definitely roof sign. Yeah.
that would be a roof sign. Or the balloons.
Yeah.
Consider a temporary sign.
Mm-hmm. That is temporary.
Crazy waving arm down.
Yeah, we can prohibit those if we want. They're not even really signage.
Second floor signs, like there's a couple of our buildings that have, the sign band, the first floor sign band. But then there's also one up on the second floor corner. Is that something that needs to be addressed?
Yeah, I think that goes to like if you're on the second floor, you get the facade floor, your sign can be 10% of the facade of the second
So you
floor.
would allow another, like that, theoretically a second sign band.
Yeah, I would think.
I think so. I mean, like the Nottingham building, Junction in Nottingham, that it's Hungry Howie's in it. They have a Hungry Howie sign up on the second floor, and then there's a couple signs kind of all over.
Yeah.
And I think that is helpful because say you own all of one building, first and second story, and you install your sign on the first band and it takes up 100% of it, and you sell your second story, then that would force you to also revise your existing sign in order to fit the new
Right.
tenant sign. So it can be a hassle to, not have that second band.
And it's always whenever a business is looking at these multi-tenant buildings, that's always the number one concern. It's signage. It's, how do people know that I'm in here? So I think being flexible with that is good.
Yeah. And I think a roof sign, I suppose we could just give it the same size as a wall sign.
Mhm. So you mean the ones that are above the roof line, the
Yeah.
braced ones?
Yeah, just treat it like a wall sign, only you're just positioning it above the wall.
Okay, and then, so for those, we'd probably also limit them to the maximum height for the district, right? Because you don't want to have
Right.
a 40-foot building height and then someone erects a giant sign and it's suddenly a 50-foot
Right.
structure. Okay.
Harry, do you see any problems with roof signs?
And it's just my opinion, I don't like a sign above the roof.
Just aesthetically.
They just don't, they look out of place.
If you're working on a first story, a single story building anyway, you can't really see up
True, yeah, it would allow for
Especially
the one on the
commercial, but yeah.
building. So should we just say no to the brace signs altogether, allow like mounting on angled roofs, but not above the roof line?
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
Probably makes sense, yeah. Anything else, right, if you were to make an appeal for a, something above the roof, right, it would, right,
Yeah.
be
do
subject
a
to some sort of
variance.
administrative review at that point, right?
That's probably fair. If you have a weird conical roof or something,
Yeah.
I don't know when that's gonna happen, but yeah, any other ones you wanna bring up, Terry?
No, those are the three that I
Okay.
needed. On your sheet too.
Sounds good. Then let's go to the last page for the signage package. It just has a few additional questions. So there's often a lot of signs that are exempt when the, actual draft text comes before you. It'll have a full list of them, but, government signs, address signs, those sorts of things. Size. So we were talking about the size for plaque signs, which are typically pedestrian oriented. You walk up, you check what business you're going to, go upstairs. But for wall signs and other sorts, do we want to consider at all the speed at which vehicles are traveling at Mack and Jefferson versus the interior streets? Or do you just want to set it at a percentage of the facade for all of them?
I just keep it simple.
Yeah. Okay. Percentage. Okay, illumination. So we already talked about neon. Typically flashing signs and changing signs are prohibited because they're a distraction to drivers. There's often also maximum illuminations that are allowed. So the illuminations are measured in foot candles, and then we'll say, okay, maximum of 10-foot candles, so someone doesn't have a flaring internally illuminated sign that looks awful. And then landscaping. So we already talked about this with monument signs, so I don't think we need to go through it. Okay, any other thoughts on signs while we're here today?
Oh, we have one other question. What about, directional signage or parking signs? If the, business has their logo or their name on that sign.
That's a good point.
The example is, the old Harbor Grill building. It's now in Georgia, and all the signs say parking for Harbor Grill only. So there's, 24 Harbor Grill signs, which they could theoretically, they could change it to Georgia. Indian cuisine signs opposed to, is that something, should that go against their total number of allowable signage, or is that directional sign for them?
So typically for directional signs, other communities will say you can do them in your business colors, but not include your business logo on them. So I think that would be a good one. Say Dunkin' Donuts wants to pink and orange, but they can't include a Dunkin' in the middle of their directional sign.
That's, I guess it's up to the board.
What would you guys think about that?
I think it's fine to have your business logo on it. I mean, just owning a business in the area,
Like if it's part of their, parking for.
Yeah.
Parking for this business only.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. Just want to make sure that that's covered.
Logos, okay. Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you guys for staying for so long and talking about all of these things with me. I had a lot of fun, and I hope you all had as much fun as I did. This has been really, really helpful, and yeah, hope everyone has a great night.
thank you.
Thank you, Nani. That was very thorough. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, unless anybody has any other comments regarding our zoning ordinance rewrite presentation, we can move on to public comment on non-agenda items. Is everybody okay moving on? Last chance. Okay. And sir, I see you standing. This gentleman had a comment on the agenda items. Is that right, sir?
I do.
So we're going to hear from him first, if that's all right.
Thank you and good evening. Mike Hindelang, I live on Yorkshire, and wanted to say, as I took a look at the residential standards portions of what you're looking at tonight, I think that mass height setback, both minimum and maximum, are things that are very much needed. I very much hope you don't become a design review. One of the proposed, not proposed, but one of the other ordinances talks about paint colors. Having seen before, for example, Bloomfield Village, I know it's not a municipality, it's a homeowners association, but the challenges that take place there. General standards are something that I think can help avoid the extremes. I would hate to have homeowners coming, and I just did a garage addition on my house, coming in and saying, do I have a color that's appropriate? Are there buttons in the windows? Are they real? Are they fake? I think is something that I will very much hope Grosse Pointe Park does not get into. There is also the range of what is a comparison. So I think it was Holland was 300 feet. On my block, there are modern homes, there are Tudors, there are center entrance colonials, there are things I can't begin to describe. There's the house with the Dr. Seuss roof across my backyard, the green, very curvy roof. To say, look next to each other or look 300 feet, you run into real problems. So I would encourage you to, as you're considering what the comparable area is, to give yourselves plenty of leeway, because the house next to mine may look nothing like the house 2 down or 3 down. And I think that's part of the charm of Grosse Pointe Park, is you have the variety. We don't have 17 center entrance colonials in a row, and that is something I think that we should. So thank you for your work on this, and best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and
Go ahead.
moving on to the non-agenda item, public comment. Sir, you stood up?
Yes. May I share a statement with the commissioners?
Sure, thank you.
My name is Rory Bolger. I'm chairperson of the Infrastructure Committee over at St. Ambrose Parish across the street. And like the planner from McKenna before me, I'm a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, city planner with a doctorate. And as you're familiar, in June and July of 2021, St. Ambrose suffered more than $4 million worth of damage from the rains and flooding that occurred. And the Infrastructure Committee has been meeting to figure out how to avoid a repeat of such a catastrophe, which in all likelihood could cause us to lose our insurance and potentially signal the closing of the St. Ambrose campus. We're concerned about the new Performing Arts Center adjoining the church's properties, whose site plans were approved by this body. It's both a cause for celebration and concern. It'll enliven the corner of the community, and it's a remarkable upgrade to a DPW yard and a bus turnaround. Yet the 1.6 acres of impervious surface that comes with the Performing Arts Center, 0.45 acres of which replaces ground that presently absorbs rainfall, worries us in a significant way, since it was the runoff from Maryland and Hampton streets that inundated the St. Ambrose Arc. More impervious surface means more runoff. What we don't see when we look at the approved plans is meaningful green infrastructure, any underground detention basin or surface retention facility to capture and hold the additional runoff from the roof and paved areas of the center. The combined 0.45 acres of brand new impervious surface in Grosse Pointe Park and the 0.42 acres of new impervious surface in Detroit exceed the half acre best practices threshold for such features. That the developer of the center has skillfully avoided the burden for significant on-site stormwater management measures, the affected municipalities and the residents are left bearing that burden to manage the additional runoff. While catastrophes like the water events of 2021 can never completely be eliminated, good planning done in advance, planning that takes advantage of the best green infrastructure practices of civil engineering, is of paramount importance for the St. Ambrose Parish and its surrounding neighborhood. We ask that the Planning Commission move quickly and forthrightly in holding the new Art Center to the highest possible standards of stormwater management. Grosse Pointe Park's laying of a new storm sewer line under Jefferson Avenue is highly significant and beneficial. We hope that the digging up of the road will also allow for the creation of some underground storage for stormwater before it's released. The prospect of additional parking for the center in front of the library on Jefferson presents the opportunity for a subsurface retention basin before the surface is paid for patron parking. The more stormwater that is withheld, the less there is to surcharge the sewer lines and potentially back up in the event of future pump failures. In closing, we thank the city for its advice and to this committee and the many over the past many months for the meaningful capital expenditures toward keeping us safe and dry. And certainly between Nick Seidman and Terry Brennan, we've had a good bit of communication and sharing of information. We bring this to you and hope that you'll help keep eyes open and with an eye toward green infrastructure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right, any other public comment on non-agenda items? Going once, twice? All right then, so then that moves us to our final agenda item, which is adjournment of tonight's meeting. So at this point, I would seek a motion to adjourn our meeting tonight.
Moved.
Commissioner Stacky, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, we're adjourned.
Sitting at Park Grove.